Philip, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I work for Jumio. We're in the identity space. My role for the first 9 years here was chief of product. Um, and now I'm chief of digital identity. That's kind of trying to future-proof Jumio for the world of digital identity and the threats that are coming down the pipe. So I've been here more than 11 years. Before that, I actually worked on a consumer product, and we had to do KYC on consumers. And so I knew exactly how big that challenge is of identifying people and keeping the fraudsters out, making it convenient for good people.
Yep.
And so when I then had the opportunity to go solve that problem, I knew that that would be a nice challenge and a good field to work in. And ever since, identity has been kind of my lifeblood. It's such an interesting topic, and it's the linchpin to accessing all the online services that really matter to people.
And online identity has fundamentally shifted very quickly in the last number of years in terms of how we identify ourselves, so to speak, has it not?
Absolutely. And I think, when we started this idea that we ask for a passport or a driver's license or something for understanding who someone is, or even asking people to show their face, when we started with that in 2014, we got strange looks and we saw that conversion rates are impacted. And now, everybody is showing their faces to their phone camera all the time. And it has become such a convenient way to unlock services, or you might use your fingerprint on the device or whatever it is. It's just I think the smartphone use has fundamentally kind of paved the way for more security in many different areas.
Yeah, people have gotten over that first layer of hurdle of, you want me to do what?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And especially it was interesting, especially around the face. Like fingerprints was always like, oh yeah, sure, do whatever you want. But face was always where people were a little bit more sensitive. And well, that has changed now. I think people are aware. Um, there's a heightened awareness now of kind of, well, I want my biometrics protected.
Yeah.
I want security and compliant kind of use of my faces, but just the comfort level and the actual mechanic handling of putting the face inside the frame is something that people can just do in their sleep, right?
Yeah, it used to be, you're chatting with people and you see their foreheads or their chins and
Yeah, exactly.
but, but
And
but but
it's
even our parents can now get their faces in the center of frame.
it is a demographic question. It's very interesting, that whole question about inclusion and making sure that everybody can use these technologies is an important one. And it's about kind of guiding the user, but it's also about kind of bringing the right method to the right people in order to achieve what you want to achieve with them in terms of authentication and security.
And it brings new challenges with accessibility. If you have someone who's blind, well, they may have a camera, but if they don't know how to, if they don't have the tools to properly aim the camera at themselves for facial identification, yeah, that's
Definitely.
that's that's a new challenge that we weren't thinking about 10 years ago.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, the next lever there is really going to be to have the digital identities where it's a reusable digital identity. So you don't need to get your wallet and your driver's license or your passport every time. But it might be a credential that lives on your phone and that you can selectively share into kind of different applications that you use. I think it's coming. Like, we've been talking about this for such a long time. It's a little bit like the payments industry when they wanted to introduce the NFC chip. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's such a great idea. It's going to be so much better when we're finally there. But we see it really kind of emerging now, and I think in 2 3 years we're going to live in a different world.
Do you foresee challenges with digital identity in terms of jurisdictions and governments and, well, this country will accept it, this country won't, this country will want to implement it this way, and this country will implement it in a way that's mutually exclusive to that country.
Absolutely. I mean, interoperability is the big term that this industry is throwing around, and you can't get through a conversation about digital identity without getting into interoperability. Um, I think where there's a very good chance that standards are going to be adopted is with the mobile driver's license
Mm-hmm.
initiative, which is an ISO standard. There's also things in motion with getting us to a digital passport, which is governed by the EATA, which governs kind of the whole cross-border document use and compatibility with everything that is on airport equipment and on all of that. So I think there's a good chance that that is going to give us a global standard as well. In terms of national EIDs, some of them try to lean towards the standard, but nobody has done really kind of a
Mm.
purebred implementation. Everybody is cooking their own thing somehow, and it's not looking as if it would be a global initiative. In the EU, the EU Digital Identity Wallet is going to harmonize a lot of this. So at least within the EU, there should be compatibility. That's a big goal of the initiative. Um, but I think internationally, it's going to be the mobile driver's license and the digital passport.
Do you see this transition of going from physical documents to electronic documents as kind of this ripe opportunity for scammers? That as we're not familiar with what the digital documents should be, that there's just this flood
Yes.
of nastiness that'll happen.
So it's very interesting because technically, on its face, the digital identity is going to be a lot more secure than your plastic identity when you use it online. There's a simple reason that most people don't think about, which is if you upload a photo of your passport today to a website for them to verify it, they then have that copy of the passport. And so what you have delivered is your identity information and the proof. So you've sent the proof
Yeah,
also along. With digital identity, you're passing the data, and so the other side has your identity information, but the proof stays with you or stays on the government server, or however the kind of the cryptographic security works. And so even though your data is now with the website provider, no one else can take it and open an account in your name because the evidence is still with you.
yeah,
And that makes a huge difference from kind of just the technical aspect of it. Um, it's like when in the US, often when I check into a hotel, they say, can you give me a copy of your passport, your driver's license? They make a photocopy, a physical copy, and they put it in a folder this thick.
yeah,
And then the folder goes kind of under the counter, and you don't know what happens to these images,
yeah,
right? And so there's certainly not a lot of security around that. And then online, you know, there's always a chance that someone gets their hands on these databases of ID photos. But if it's only the data, like it's bad enough if your first name, last name, date of birth, your residence address, all of that gets stolen, but it's probably out there anyways. But with digital identity, you can't do anything with it because you can't prove that you are that person.
yeah,
The proof is missing. So that means the consequence is because there are less attack vectors on the technical track, the attack vectors must shift towards attacking the individual
yeah,
and towards scamming and getting people to use their identity in a way that benefits the fraudster or get access to the identity itself, hijack it, whatever. Um, and so we definitely are going to see a rise in the different schemes and modes of operation that the fraudsters are deploying.
yeah. It's interesting. There was a. I'm going to be intentionally vague here because we're this is a being broadcast. There was a particular vendor that I was working with, and I got an email from them saying that something had changed on my account, and like I know I was not logged in and had not changed anything, so I immediately access the account, change the reset all the security settings, and contacted their fraud department. And someone had basically contacted them saying, "Hey, I'm Chris. I got locked out of my account. Let me
Hmm.
send you a copy of my passport." And they had a fake passport, and so they provided all this kind of fake documentation of who of their proof of documentation of being me in order to take over access to this particular account. And I was like, this is definitely a challenge because the person who is looking at the paper documents or the scan of a document, they have no way of validating whether it was a real document
Yeah.
and had nothing to compare it with to see, well, is it really Chris?
So that's something we're seeing every day, the kind of the evolution of the sophistication level of the fraudulent documents, right? And so we used to have different categorizations where you had, just kiddies trying to hide their age or something, and it
Yeah.
was low effort. They would put, even sometimes a sticker or a piece of paper with a new date of birth or something, like obvious. Even those low criminal energy attempts are now looking quite sophisticated. And
Yeah.
so the really kind of dumb, stupid fraud that you can easily identify has pretty much gone away. Um, and one of the things that really scares me is that just 2 weeks ago, um, our engineers have now proven that with a AI image generation pipeline and the right templates, you can create, real looking but fake ID documents en masse. So you have your file where you have all the names and all the dates and everything you want printed on the document, and then you hit the button and you generate thousands or tens of thousands of fake documents.
Oh, wow.
Whereas before, the fraudsters had to do a lot of that manually. They had to go into Photoshop, they had to kind of really put work in, and it would take them maybe half an hour to create a well done, high sophistication level fraud document. You can now just create them. And it's the scale that is scary, because now they're not attempting to get through with one or two or five or 10 documents. They might send you thousands and try to open thousands of accounts in the hope that, one of these might eventually succeed. And the effort for them is quite minimal. And that's I think the evolution is just the scale of these attacks that we're gonna see.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the transition of how uh, 419 or the Nigerian prince scams escalated. It used to be that they had to, one of the original routes was either postal mail, so they had to pay they had to pay to put a stamp on an envelope and throw it in the mail. Then it escalated to fax machines, and they still had to, pay for the phone call, pay for the fax machine. It takes time to send faxes, and then faxes were automated, and then the huge, you know, parallel was when they went to email, they could send out millions of emails at effectively zero cost. And this is now sounding like the same thing with identity.
Yeah. Um, but to go even so that analogy works. And I think to your point, it goes even further now, because now you have these chatbots that are intelligent in holding a conversation. And so imagine the scammer sent out 50,000 emails and he got a 1% kind of response rate. Now he had to react to those
Yeah.
responses and see what are people saying, what questions do they have, how do I take that next step. So they maybe had template, I'm sure they had some templates, but they had to figure out which reaction is appropriate and how do I get this victim to the next step. You can now connect the chatbot and it can perfectly do that. It can stay in context, it can hit the right tone, it can be, so this is scary, because I don't think that the consumers are yet aware of how quickly generative AI is changing that landscape. I think nobody yet has really kind of hit the alarm and said, everybody, the internet is changing, and be careful and protect yourselves, and how to protect yourself, right? And the other thing that I always think is missing is guidance and help when you've already become a victim of identity
Yeah.
theft. Where do you turn to? How do you know what to do next? What do you do with all your other accounts where you so which attack vectors do you have to be aware of? How do you behave? Do you check your bank account now on a daily basis, or is it enough to check it on a weekly? Like simple questions
Yeah.
that all victims ask themselves, and there is no good guidance out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think the from the legislative side, the banks have an obligation of what they have to do from their perspective when fraudulent transactions have happened. The credit agencies have things that they have to do, but you as the consumer still have to know. Well, who do I talk to? What do I tell them? What's the process? There's not this one stop shop for helping you to unravel identity stuff.
Absolutely. And I think it's a little bit unfair also to kind of shift all that burden towards the end user, right? It's very easy. You read in the newspaper, some guy was scammed into sending 50,000, dollars or euros or whatever, and you're like, that's silly behavior. But at the end of the day, I think it's on the institutions, on the businesses that offer their services online to make sure they are safe, to make sure that they're safe in a way where even if the end user cooperates with the fraudster because he got duped, he still can do damage. So there are ways to protect people from kind of giving away kind of their valuables.
Yeah.
Whether it's use of biometric authentication, or whether it's stepping up the security to even ask again for a document or something. So there are ways to kind of get to a level of security where even if the end user is strict, it might not be that easy to kind of get to the assets. And I mean, online is where it happens at a high kind of scalability. We've now seen cases where, fraudsters set up a pop-up shop in the center of a shopping mall.
Oh
And
wow.
they had people kind of scan their IDs and scan their faces in order to participate in a raffle or something. And people are like, oh, great. Yeah, I can win a car or a phone or whatever. And so they're just giving away whatever. But those are the rare cases. Those
Yeah.
are the rare cases. The main attack vector is still contacting people online, emails, text messages, social media. That's where it happens. Social media is another another great example. We did a survey recently where we asked people if they are willing to invest more effort into their account security for the different things they do online.
Hmm.
And it was very interesting because it showed us that people are very smart about this in a way. So they had everything where there are, assets and things you need to protect, they ranked kind of high. And then things where it matters less, they ranked at the bottom. The exception was social media. I think so. Social media, in my opinion, should have ranked much higher,
Yeah.
but it ranked very low. And so people don't think about their social media account as an asset that needs to be protected. I can tell you, we've seen these cases. If someone gets a hold of your LinkedIn account, it's a
Oh yeah.
nightmare.
Yes.
It's a nightmare. And so that I think hasn't really landed yet. That social media is the gateway to other areas in your life because you then can social engineer yourself into more information and more access.
Well, and you've now, as the scammer, if you've taken over someone's social media account, you now have access to everybody they know, not as a scammer, but as a trusted ally, a trusted friend. So if my friend says, "Hey, Chris, I'm kind of tight this month. Can you give me $20?" I'm a lot more inclined to help out a friend versus some random person texting me saying, "Hey, can you give me 20?" I don't know who you are. Why would I give you $20? But like
Yeah,
I did have this happen recently where I was connected on a social media platform with a former coworker. He and I have had no communication in the last 10 years. I see his posts on this platform, but we've never had a conversation. And he immediately starts up a conversation. Hey, how's it going? And I was just like, okay, this is weird. We've never communicated on this social media platform. And so immediately I was like, okay, this is probably a scam. Let me see where this goes. And within a couple of messages, it was like, hey, I've got a problem with my electric bill and I haven't gotten paid yet by my employer, which he references based on the information on the social media account. They've got a problem. Hey, can you help me cover my electric bill or something like that? And I immediately know, okay, there's the scam. So texting messaging his relatives saying, "Hey, this guy's account's been compromised." Message his
Yeah, but
wife, "Hey," but
I mean, you've invested years into educating consumers about this stuff, right? So you look at this with a completely different eye.
that's the point, is that trust that normal people that normally people would have for their friend approaching them on a compromised social media account is, hey, it's my friend. Why would I not listen to them?
But would you, I mean, you've done this for many years now, the consumer education side. Um, would you agree that the consumers are, as a general population, getting smarter about online security, or is it getting worse? Or like, what's your take?
I, I think people are getting smarter about some things. Um, I think the well documented blatant scams. I think people are, the Nigerian prince says, "Hey, you've won, $10 million." People are comfortable with that, but I'm getting people contacting me every day where someone that they've met on a dating site, they've had this kind of casual interaction with on a dating site, has duped them into a fake crypto investment scam. And that's what I've seen happening on social media. So it's not like, hey, I'm taking the money from you or you're sending the money to me. It's this third party platform that's done it to them. And,
Hmm,
and so I think like that shift away from, hey, you're stealing from me versus this platform is broken. Like that's what I've seen is they're still holding on to this relationship with the scammer, thinking that it's the platform that's scamming them, not the person that they're actually talking to.
interesting.
And so there's been a little bit of shift that way. But yeah, I think in some areas people have gotten a lot smarter. I still run across people who use the same password for everything, and
Yeah.
oh, okay, well, let me change. Oh, my account got compromised. Let me change every account now to have that same new password. I'm like, no, no, don't do that. It's still, there's a certain barrier to secure. Security is always a barrier, and it's a challenge of what are people willing to tolerate for the
Yeah.
experience they want to have. People are much more willing to do two-factor authentication to access their bank account once a week versus I've got to do two-factor authentication to access my social media account several times a day.
Oh, yeah.
And so those incremental uh, verification requests start to become burdensome, even though they realize the value of them. That the inconvenience of them overweighs the
Yeah.
perceived value of them.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great example where I think that the business, can do more. So maybe there is a way to deploy, uh, you know, passive behavioral biometrics or something like that, right? Where you're just checking if, the way the person, pulls the phone out of the pocket can already tell you
Yeah,
whether this is the user. You're like that technology exists, but
yeah,
it's not deployed as widely as we would want in the security field.
yeah. I mean, I think Apple has done a fairly good job with the iPhone in terms of you now can allow apps to do facial recognition as a instead of two-factor authentication,
Right.
on things. And so that becomes a more, I'm willing to hold my phone in front of my face for an extra
You're looking
second.
at it anyways, and
So there's no inconvenience to me, but there's been that biometric uh, authentication factor. Um, but I agree. I think banks, financial institutions, to me, I haven't quite figured this one out yet. So, um, As a good example, a number of years ago, I got contacted by my bank legitimately. Hey, there's been fraudulent transaction on the account. We
Hmm.
stopped it, and we're going to cancel your card. All your scheduled transactions will go through, but we're going to send you a new card because the card's been compromised. So they were able to figure out from a single transaction that something was fraudulent, but they still seem to let an awful lot of wire transfers go through and things like that. So it's like, okay, there's a certain amount of machine learning which caught that, but you don't seem to be applying it towards things
Yeah.
that require a little bit more human intervention on a regular basis. I did have a transaction with a bank where I opened up an account and had to do an international wire, and I got a phone call from the fraud department at the bank who interrogated me enough to be annoying, but I was really happy at the same time. Who are you sending money
Yeah.
to? Why are you sending it to? Are you sure this isn't a scam? I super appreciated it, but from consumers that I've talked to, that's few and far between. They set up a wire transfer on their bank account, the money goes. There's no contact from the bank saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
you've never done this before.
Right.
You only have 5,000. You only have $6,000 in your account, and you're sending $5,000 to someone that you just created the transfer for. That seems out of
Weird.
character for
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
consumer.
Yeah.
We should intervene here."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that,
No,
and
I
I
I
don't know
can't
how it
say that
applies
I've
to other things.
I can't say that I've ever had the bank stop a transaction, and you know, I usually, yeah, no, I can't remember a case. But I mean, to your point, at the end of the day, the inconvenience still lands on
On the
the good
consumer.
citizen consumer, right? And so, and so it's the method, right? It's if they say, could you confirm for me, by giving me certain data points. All right. If it's something that I really have in my head, where it becomes tricky is we want to know the third transaction from the previous kind of monthly statement. What was the amount? It's like, oh, okay, let me go find that. I don't know if I even have it anymore. So I think it's the method that makes the difference.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. I remember one time it was like, what was the last amount of your credit card payment that you made? I'm like, I don't know. How would I know? Like,
I I had to check the other day online to verify a transaction, and it gave me a list of, I think, 15 transactions or so with amounts and kind of targets and everything. And it was like, do you recognize any of these? And I'm like, that's like none of these. Like, what is this? This is not something that I like, none of these. And then I saw that at the very bottom, if you scroll down, there is the none of the above option.
oh
And
no,
that
no, no,
was
no,
actually
no.
the right button to click. It was the none of the above
Oh,
that
that's
got me the
awful.
trans.
That's a
Yeah,
horrible experience.
right, right. And so because, biometrics are so strong and so convenient and are governed by a really strong standard, right? Because if you look at what FIDO has done for the industry in terms of really getting the best practices out there, communicating it, making sure it works in all cases, where is it a face-to-face transaction? Is it an online transaction? Is it kind of mixed reality? Like it now, there are standards for everything, right? Um, and so this is well governed, it's well understood, the technology is there, it's right on your phone. There's really no reason to bother the end user anymore with these knowledge-based authentication challenges. and
Mhm.
and I think that would make a big difference for users. And it's something that the user can get behind. Like I said in our survey, clearly people were saying, I'm willing to do something for
Yeah.
security in my bank account, in my, stockbroker account, whatever. But I don't think that message has landed yet necessarily with those businesses
Yeah.
that they they could do more with less inconvenience.
And I think they need to be more consistent about even what they're currently doing. I don't think is particularly great. I mean, I've had a number of financial institutions where you know, my favorite password manager spits out a 32 character password with all the appropriate bells and whistles and underscores, and the bank says, well, you can't use those characters, or that
Yeah.
password is too long. And I'm like, you're forcing me to choose less security. Like that seems odd, that like, oh no, you can only use a password that's like 12 characters max. I'm
Yeah,
like,
and here's the set of special characters you may use.
yes.
Only these and not the others.
Yeah, like you've intentionally taken something that was secure and whittled it down to be less secure for some really obscure reason.
Yeah. Yeah, my bet is it's because of the legacy systems that sit way, way, way behind everything. Um, but you're right. I mean, that's just not good practice. And what I found extremely interesting was this recommendation and research from NIST in the US, where they basically said you shouldn't have your users change your password every 90 days. It actually makes security worse
Yep.
because it drives bad behavior on the user side. They will use simpler passwords, easier to remember, easier to change. They will reuse passwords across
Yep.
site. Like all of that behavior is driven by that 90-day change policy. So that I found very interesting. This is like 2 years ago or
Yeah.
so that came out, and that was quite interesting.
I,
Um,
I understand the reasoning for that was the fear that, well, the password's been compromised. So if we give them a 90-day window to have to change their password, we know their account can't be compromised for more than 90 days. And after 90 days, the account's no longer compromised. Well, just do two-factor authentication and you've eliminated 99% of that without the hassle.
Absolutely. Yeah. But so let's say, I'm right, and there is a huge wave of new fraud methods and scaled up. So basically old MOs, but just scaled up
Yeah.
to a much larger level. Um, I mean, aside from your own website, where can people kind of learn something? How do people get more sophisticated as a general population?
And I think that's one of the challenges. I don't think there is a one-stop shop of where can I go to learn about all the latest stuff. And I've had a couple of recent discussions where that's probably not even the right way to educate people, because then they're looking for, it's the Nigerian prince. Well, as soon as it's the Canadian businessman, they're looking at the wrong warning signs. They're looking at the scenario rather than critically
Hmm.
thinking, is someone trying to trigger my emotions? Is someone pressuring me with urgency? Is someone using authority? We're not teaching people critical thinking. We're teaching people, here's just this big long list of red flags. Well, as soon as
Yeah.
that list is 50,000 things, you can't keep track of your red flags anymore. So I think there's more of a need to educate people on knowing when people are trying to take advantage of you by the psychological mechanisms that they use,
Right.
versus, well, if you get this email and it comes in at 2 a.m., it's probably not from someone who lives in your time zone.
Hmm.
Those warning signs that we would maybe historically 10 years ago that we would tell people, I don't know that they're necessarily valid anymore, or they're too overwhelming. I wish I could
The-
say, like, here's this one stop shop that will help you with everything, but there isn't. And I think Australia has a great scam watch website. If you want to learn about scams, probably one of the best. I think scamwatch.au. But again,
Well,
it's talking the specifics of scams, not methodologies and
the general warning
the
signs.
general warning signs. What are the techniques? They're just talking about the specifics of the scam.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone comes up to me and says I have a Taylor Swift ticket or something like that, that's, hey, if I'm a Taylor Swift fan, then I'm now more likely
Did
to fall for that as a scam because they know I'm a Swiftie.
yeah. Did you hear that story that they think most of the concert tickets got actually bought by bots instead of real users?
I hadn't. You had told me that in the green room, but prior to that, I don't know that I had necessarily heard that. But it wouldn't surprise me. It's not like buying a ticket is a really complicated process. So, are we talking like scam ticket purchases or purchases done for the purpose of scalping the tickets?
Scalping it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what it is. And so the way we heard about it, it's the main protection mechanism is a capture.
Oh, yeah.
And so, the AI technologies, they're laughing about this. It's I think 96% or so of the captures can be passed by
That's better
AI
than me.
tools already. Yeah, that's what I said is I have trouble sometimes. But it's insane how this technology has evolved. The AI can see, it can hear, it can generate text, it can generate images. And the one that I'm actually very weary about and still waiting for to hear about cases is speech synthesis. And so when you then get a phone call from a voice that sounds like your own mom or something like that, that's going to change the landscape yet again for the scammers.
It's already. I've heard of a number of very specific cases where that is already happening. Where you let's where with a fairly limited set of audio, they can create uh, a very convincing synthesized voice. So if you're on TikTok, if you're on YouTube, and you've got more than a couple of minutes of audio of you talking, that's pretty much enough for them to come up with
Wow.
something that under the right situations work. Because if you think of uh, I'm upset, I'm in duress, I've hurt myself, I'm scared. Well, now the way I communicate is different from how I communicate when I'm calm. So anyone who's listening to me, well, it sounds like Chris, but I'm going to ignore the fact that it doesn't quite sound like him
Yeah.
because he's going through something traumatic or scary or whatever. And then it's, hey mom, this is my daughter. These were the examples. It was daughters who were
Oh wow.
supposedly off at college that had been picked up by the police or kidnapped,
Now that's
and they were
evil.
using it to to scam the parents. That's
Yeah.
just downright evil.
And
I,
I agree with you. I think generally, I suspect that the general population has become an easier target maybe for scams also because, the world has become more stressful
yeah,
and scary and difficult for people to navigate as a whole in the last few years. So I think there's just more like these scams, they fall on really kind of good soil for them to grow and prosper. Um,
and I think I think it's also a little bit in a sense there's more opportunity now. If you're looking 10 years ago, people weren't online as much, and the people
yeah,
that we interacted with online were people that we had met in real life. They're family members, friends, people that we used to go to school with, people that we worked with. In the moment, we might not be, sitting across the table from them, but at some point in the past we did. Now there's people that I I do work with that I've worked with them for several years. I've never met them in person. I've only ever seen them on Zoom. And so once you have no basis for who is this person really, I think it's you're more there's a bigger opportunity to be scammed by someone who's online because it used to be, well, if someone's online, our defenses are really high. Now, because of COVID and years of
yeah,
Zoom, this is just normal, and you could be generative AI face, on somebody else, and I wouldn't have any reason to suspect that you're
yeah.
a generated face.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is also an area that we tested. The like people vastly overestimate their ability to detect a fake image or a fake face or a fake
Yeah.
video. It's insane how much confidence there is that yeah, of course I can detect a deep fake. No, you can't. And yeah, I mean, I also love technology. I think it's wonderful what this technology can do. Um, but at the same time, it can be abused, of course.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think, I mean, to get to a more hopeful state of the conversation, maybe, I think this is where my big hope lies in a, reusable online or digital identity, where very easily and conveniently you can prove to the other side who you are,
Yeah.
sometimes maybe in a passive way where that just gets kind of exchanged, or you have a relationship with a person that you interact with on social media, and you have made that connection of identity, and so it just gets checked whether that key still checks out or
Hmm.
something. And really kind of secure the communication channels in that way a little bit, but also make it easier for people to identify themselves with businesses they interact with other people they
Yeah.
interact with. And I'm not saying, pull out your driver's license or passport every time you talk to someone
Yeah.
online. It has to get like this promise of reusable identity is you get a verified identity once, and then you can reuse it in a very, very convenient way, right?
Yeah.
I think this is where the solutions we see today in the market partially still fall short. We've done a joint demo the other day to a customer, and they basically said, "Well, I'm better off just using my driver's license if that is the user flow." And I do understand that sentiment. It's currently still a little bit cumbersome for the end users, but I'm very positive that digital identity is going to change that whole security aspect of the internet as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. I see two. There's two things that I see as concerns of digital identities. Is one, and I think I've heard this one discussed. Do I have the ability to revoke it? In
Mm,
sense, like I've provided it to this company to prove who I am. I want to now kind of revoke that relationship and say,
access, yeah.
I want to. If I interact with you again in the future, I have to re-identify that it's as opposed to saying I've identified once, assume that I'm identified, but I want to be able to retract it and you can't do anything with me anymore. And then there's the fear of uh, fraud on the front end. If I pay somebody at the digital identity verification center to set up a fake identity, it is now a much more trusted fake identity.
It's the golden key to the kingdom. Yeah.
Because so now I've set up it's instead of Chris Parker, it's John Parker, and I now have two identities, and John is has all the authentication, and now because we trust this digital authentication so well that other warning signs might be overlooked because well he has a valid identity.
Yeah, and I think
Because there's always a human element somewhere in the process that can be exploited.
definitely, and I think that's why we think about digital identity as an evolutionary step and an add-on,
Yeah.
not a full-on replacement. Because the tools that are there today that help you identify risk, where you do check for behavior. So like you
Yeah.
said, you're wiring all your money to the Caymans. Is that what you usually do every week, or is that new, right? Like that kind of stuff is not going away.
Yeah.
And that's still going to be relevant and important. Um, it's also that I think that when digital identity happens at a large scale and really sees adoption, there's going to be way more use cases and places where we're going to use it as users.
Yeah.
And that's why this kind of frictionless use for the end user is a must. Today, if you are, a question and answer forum, right, where people can post questions and others can give answers, they would love to know everybody's identity, not in the sense of understanding who it is, but just to make sure that, if there's hate speech and
Hmm.
if there are legal implications, they know how to get to somebody in the real world, right? And have some accountability for what you
Yeah.
say online, right? Um, but it's currently cost prohibitive for them. They just cannot, because the technology, like, that's not scalable for them.
Yeah.
with a digital identity that virtually costs nothing to transmit. All these use cases are going to open up in addition where we don't even think about it using identity today. And that's going to make it, very widespread, and you're going to use it multiple times a day. Today, when I ask people, do you use your identity online? It's either no or once a year or twice a
Yeah.
year. Like, okay, I use my driver's license here to rent a car, and I use my passport here to do an online check-in. Okay. But that's gonna change with the advancements in digital identity. It's going to be everywhere and all the time.
And I think it will significantly I think you're still going to have someone who's going to be able to get a fake ID, but the cost, we have then again shifted that cost to someone can't
Right,
create millions and millions and millions of fake digital identities. That becomes cost prohibitive until the next
right.
evolution. So
It's an eternal arms race.
yes. So what like this has been a great conversation, and we've waxed philosophical about these things. What can consumers do now? Like, should I be an early adopter when my bank comes out with new authentication measures? Should we be telling our banks and government agencies, "Hey, I want this. What are you planning on doing about it?" Kind of, how can consumers advocate for this, or what steps should they be taking or looking for?
So I think number one is self-education and really trying to kind of stay on top of what's happening. The second one definitely is, oh my God, if two-factor authentication is offered as optional, just do it, right? I mean, that's the main takeaway. Where possible, use secure biometrics to secure your accounts. Um, and and as you said, where applicable, I mean, not everybody is going to phone their bank, but maybe, if you go in and you have a conversation with your rep, maybe you can ask them about, hey, how can I improve my security? What are you guys doing to kind of keep my account safe? I think getting that conversation going is important as well. Um, and then when you send, copies of documents, for example, make sure that they are transmitted in a secure way, that you understand where you upload it, that it's not
Yeah.
the wrong site where you are uploading your documents to. Um, and then also make use of the right to just have companies delete your data again.
Yeah.
Like that's at least here in the EU where I live, that's a right that every consumer has. And if you don't feel like you're using the service anymore, or you don't have a relationship, make sure that your data is gone. Um, so that data minimization kind of concept that is there for businesses and
Yeah.
is a security practice also goes for the end user. Just make sure your data is you're careful who you share it with, and then get it deleted if you feel they don't need it anymore.
Yeah, definitely in the US, we don't have uh, the EU level of right to be forgotten, so to speak. Uh,
Yet,
s- Yet we'll get there. It's a little bit spotty in the US. I think California probably has the most strict
right,
right to be forgotten. But I like that. I want to. I've in more of this position if I'm trying to actively remove my information that's out there that I don't want out there. That I don't want it places. I don't want the junk mail. I don't want the junk email. I don't want to be marketed to as much. I don't want data brokers having my data
right.
and trying to. I know I don't think I can make it all go away, but I'm definitely trying to, like, well, what can I actively do to minimize what I share, how I share, and retract what I can.
And at the same time, just be aware that probably your data is out there.
Yeah.
And so you have to behave in a way where, when you are trying to be vigilant and you're trying to kind of spot scammers, just be aware that they have a lot of knowledge out there and they can use it to trick you into believing that they are authentic.
Yeah. And if you're a Swifty fan and someone says they have Taylor Swift tickets for you, be cautious.
That sounds dangerous.
Philip, if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
Um, Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so happy to connect on LinkedIn with people. Um, and as part of kind of the Jumio universe, of course, we're always happy to chat with people that wanna up their identity game.
And if people want to see what Jumio is doing, how can they find Jumio?
Jumio.com is the public website, and that's where, most of the information is gonna be there.
That's too easy.
No, we make it easy. We make identity easy.
That's a good slide. Hope is that your the corporate slogan?
It's not, but maybe it should be.
Can I get naming rights to it? Philip, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.